Welcome to the Peter King Podcast, sort of a mid-season NFL podcast. We're almost at the halfway point of the 102nd NFL campaign. We're going to have quite a few things to discuss today and this week as we exit Week 8 and head into the midpoint, right about Week 9. Now that it's 17 games as the regular season, much to my chagrin. But now that it's 17 games, the midpoint comes a little bit later. So we'll welcome in Paul Burmeister, my friend from NBC, in a moment. And we'll also have as our guest, former NFL cornerback Darius Butler, the pride of the Connecticut Huskies, who is trying to make his way in the media business now, and I think is doing a fantastic job in basically analyzing the game and giving it a really good take, particularly from a DB's perspective. The former second-round pick of the Patriots. We'll have a good discussion with Darius Butler. But we're going to start first with my friend Paul Burmeister. And Paul, I think one of the things that I look at as we sort of look at the news of the week, I think it's sort of dwarfed by the Kansas City Chiefs right now, and by the fact that we are seeing in the first half of this season Kansas City change before our very eyes and play a real conservative, try to play sort of a safe game versus what we're used to seeing in Kansas City. Even after the 20-17 Monday night nail-biter against the New York Giants. They're just 4-4, and 3 of their last 4 games, they've scored 20 points or less. So I'm going to ask you the $64 million question, and I don't mean Roger Goodell's salary. The $64 million question is, what did the Chiefs show you on Monday night, and do you think that they're on their way back, or are they on their way to a really frustrating year?
I would say small steps toward a good year, Peter. I don't think it was a giant leap in the right direction. They didn't all of a sudden look super comfortable in their own skin now that teams are playing, dropping 7 players and playing that cover 2 with the safeties just bailing out. It's not like they snapped their fingers and said, oh, okay, that Tennessee game, now we get it. Now we can play well this way. But they certainly understand what teams are doing, and I think that they're on their way to finding their way to be, as their coaches and players and fans would hope, effective in January. But it's all of a sudden for them, Peter, it's fairways and greens instead of trying to hit the giant drive and some really cute shot up to the green and then nailing a long putt. Now, they're having to play in a much different way, and I don't think they look really comfortable doing it. But they are capable of winning that way, and I think last night was a small step in the right direction.
You know what I noticed, Paul? And this is something about Kansas City that I think is really, really important right now. Okay, when they came out on their first drive, dink, 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 dunk, and basically making sure that they just move the chains, take what is given. And then on their second drive, when they get near the goal line, Patrick Mahomes, it looked to me, is going, and he just wants to cut it loose so bad and play like he always has, that he throws that sort of that missile shot into the end zone, through the hands of Josh Gordon, off a helmet, and it's intercepted. And I just thought to myself, man, if I'm Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes is coming to the sidelines, and I look at him and I would say, man, you were doing so great until you sort of regressed to try to make it like it was 2019 all over again, when we're good enough to play like it's 2019, but we're just not clicking right now. So don't try to play like it's 2019. This is a new season. It's a new time. Stop forcing anything. And I know it's difficult for Mahomes, but Paul, you were a quarterback, and you have confidence in certain things that you can do, or you had confidence in certain things you could do during a game. And what I see in Mahomes is, okay, coach, I'm going to do exactly what you say. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine. But there are some times out there where he really wants to be classic Mahomes. And at this point, because there just isn't the spacing, there's just not the room, there's not the deep respect in the secondary to loosen up the middle of the field, things just aren't there anymore. Tell me what you see. Look into the mind of another quarterback, and what do you see in Mahomes right now?
I see, for me, Peter, and I've thought a lot about this season, last night and this morning especially, a couple of ways that I've kind of made sense of it. And one of them, I kind of stumbled into this anecdotal example being around my kids' room, Peter, and follow me here. Vinyl is back for music. The old albums are back. Both of my boys have old record players in their rooms and play the music they listen to. And if you remember, there's two kinds of tracks. There's the 33, where you can play the singles. It's really fast. It spins in a faster way. And then there's the old album that's a 45. It goes slower, and it just works better that way. Patrick Mahomes has been playing on a 45. It's fast. That's the way he's used to playing. That's what makes sense to him. That's what feels right to him in the pocket. And now it's like he has to back up and play a 33. His 45 rhythm is too fast. He ends up moving sideways, moving forward, throwing jump passes because he's so sped up. He had so much success playing that way. And when teams aren't being aggressive with the blitz and showing you man-to-man and making you have to move in the pocket, it's kind of like you're back to a 33. It's a little bit slower, and he's just not always on that RPM right now. And that's kind of what I see with him for kind of like a music example, if you can follow that. And then strictly football-wise, it feels different in the pocket, and it looks different in the pocket when teams drop 7. When teams are coming after you, it's fast. You hit the top of your drop, and you know you have to get rid of it. When they're dropping 7, only rushing 4, most of the time, you have the time for an extra shuffle, for a little move sideways, a little move the other way, a little move back in the pocket, where you're not scrambling to leave the pocket. And it's like he's not quite all the way comfortable playing that way all the time. And one other thing that's a little bit more in the weeds football-wise, from how it looks for a quarterback, when you're against man defense, you know you pick out one guy and you're watching to see if he opens up. You have to be aware of a free safety coming around, but you're pretty much looking at one guy that you picked out. You like that matchup, waiting to see if he gets open. Against the zone, you have to zoom out with your vision and kind of just use the peripheral vision. And you see gaps and you see color. You see your jerseys versus their jerseys. And if you're not looking at one thing, you can kind of see that. You can see the openings. You can see where the ball is supposed to go because you're not focused in on one thing. And I don't know if he's doing that well or not, but I remember the difference in looking at a zone and looking at a man. And that's what I think of, that if he zooms out a little more, he'll see the open spaces, he'll see the gaps, and it'll tell him where the ball is supposed to go.
Paul, that really reminds me of a story I once did. I took a game when I worked for Sports Illustrated. I took a game, Tampa Bay against Minnesota, when Adrian Peterson was in his prime. And, it's amazing to think Adrian Peterson signs with Tennessee, and I'm going to talk about when Adrian Peterson and Derek Brooks dueled in a game. And I remember asking Adrian Peterson the week of this game, and I covered the game and then afterwards, and he kept coming back to this point, that in the week I'm going to play, I look and see the color of the jersey that we're going to play that week. And in this particular week, if the Bucks are going to be red, if the Bucks are going to be white, I just condition myself, what color are they? And then during the game, I run from that color. And I don't try in any way to make it more complicated than that. If somebody is coming right at me who's got that color, I'm going away from that person. And then if I see another one, then I'm going to try to split them. And he said, I always just run from color. And I always thought that that is such an interesting way to look at, what happens when you're on a field that's 100 yards long and 53 yards wide. You don't really have as much room as maybe you might hope if you're a running back or a quarterback. But for the defense, obviously they want to narrow that. And I think what you're saying about Mahomes right now is absolutely spot on. You have to focus out now instead of focusing just narrowly, because you can tell now defenses are really trying to take away Tyreek Hill and that deep ball. And I thought on the Manning cast Monday night, one of the things that they kind of harped on, and I think they're right, is, man, Travis Kelce has got to get going. And whether it's that he's not open because these spaces now are smaller, but, he had a fumble, he had a drop last night on Monday night. So I kind of look at it like it still just doesn't quite feel right, but I still think that they can get there.
Absolutely. And I thought about Kelce as well, too, Peter. And there's a big difference for a tight end or a receiver or running back in terms of how they get open against man coverage and how they have to find themselves open and get in the right spots against zone. And I don't know if Travis Kelce is good at one or not as good at the other, but there's a big difference for a tight end between getting open against someone who's pounced on you and you got to beat him one-on-one, and then having kind of the nuance in the field to find the spot in the zone defense. Maybe that's part of his production going down a little bit, and Patrick Mahomes not finding him as well. But whether it's Andy Reid, Kelce, or Patrick Mahomes, they're all having to learn a much different version of the same game. I think we've seen that in the first half of the season, and we'll see how they continue to evolve, all of them, here in the second half.
Hey, Paul, let's move to the Von Miller trade, which I thought was really an interesting trade just from two standpoints, okay? From Denver's standpoint, here's what the Broncos did. They basically said, okay, we realize that we need to build for the future now, and we may need, we're not going to say this, and I'm sure that nobody connected with the Broncos would say this, but they understand they need chips to try to play at the quarterback table when March and April come around, whether it be in the draft, and it's sort of looking now like it's going to be an underwhelming draft class for quarterbacks, or whether they're going to be able to get into that veteran quarterback market. Who knows? Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. No one knows right now what that's going to look like. But I'll tell you what exactly happened, Paul, and this is interesting. The Rams and the Broncos have been discussing this for weeks. And last week, they basically started on this concept. Look, this is going to be a 2 if a second-round pick from the Rams to Denver, if you are going to ask us to pay most of the salary, which we don't have that money, so it probably won't get done. But it's a 2 if we do that. It's a 2 and a 3 if you will pay the vast majority of the salary. And so that became something that was more and more possible and more palatable to the Denver Broncos, because the Broncos may finish around middle of the pack where the draft is. This gives them, in agreeing to pay $9 million of Von Miller's $9.7 million due this year, in agreeing to pay for the rest of this year, in agreeing to pay for $9 million of it, the Denver Broncos and George Payton, the general manager, bought a third-round pick. And here's what I find more interesting about that too, Paul. The fact that in buying that pick, what Denver did very quietly is they told their guys, look, we're not there right now, and we're probably not going to be there, and we need, even though we're still going to try like heck to make the playoffs this year, we do need to have one eye on 2022. Now, Just 2 points about the Rams that I thought were quite interesting. Number one, I talked to somebody who was in their locker room yesterday during the day, and basically people are fired up because they're so excited about the prospect that this team is going for it and going for it right now. So you got the full backing of players, of Leonard Floyd, of Aaron Donald, of Jalen Ramsey. Those guys are really excited now. And I also think that there's a philosophy in this organization, Paul, and that philosophy is we trust veterans more than we lust after the 62nd and the 98th picks in this draft. And I think what you're going to see, they're not going to ask Von Miller to play every snap because, he's been a little bit fragile in recent years. They're not going to ask him to play every snap. I believe you're going to see him play maybe 40 to 60% of the snaps to try to keep him whole so that late in the season, they're going to be able to have sort of classic Von Miller, playing well when it really counts. To me, this was a move for January and February, not a move for November. I realize I've droned on, but what was your take on the deal?
I like that you leave it off thinking about January and February, because that's right where my mind went. First of all, Peter, I remember the conversations we had in the draft and you making the point week after week about how impressed you were with the GMs now not thinking about draft picks the way they used to think of them, that they're much more willing to give up high picks to win right now, to make a bold and a risky move. And this one certainly rings true to that thought we had in the spring. But as for Von Miller and the Rams in January and February, think about it this way. 2 picks, second round, a third round pick. Pretty steep. But if he makes 2 plays in January and even February, if in a playoff game he makes on a 3rd down and 8 against Kyler Murray, he comes up with a sack, they get a winning field goal. Okay, that's 1 pick. He's worth it right there. If again, in January and February, tight game against Tom Brady, Russell Wilson, Aaron Rodgers, you pick a quarterback they're likely going to be playing at that time of the year. If he comes up with a strip sack that leads to a touchdown and they win by 1 score, those 2 plays, was he worth a 2nd and 3rd round pick? I think the answer would be 100% hell yes.
And I think the one other point about this that we really can't forget is that if you're the Rams right now, you are getting to the point where you're probably never going to be better or have a better chance to win a Super Bowl than right now. Because, look, Aaron Donald, who knows how many more years he has left. There are injuries that hit all the time. And they were fortunate last year in that department. And so they're healthy. They've got their guys playing very, very well. And I think when you have a chance to go for it, the Rams have proven time and again, they'll take the veteran over the future draft choice. I just really liked it. But the one other thing I want to ask you, Paul, is what about bringing a guy on that team mentally, in that locker room and on that team? What does that do? And what kind of effect can that have to the team on the field?
First of all, I think anybody you talk to that's played with Von Miller enjoys having him on the team, not only for what he can do on the field, but he's the kind of veteran people enjoy being around. So as far as the locker room, I think they're going to enjoy him quite a bit. And if you're talking about a smart, savvy veteran player, and you just stated that the Rams value veteran players, maybe somewhere in their mind too, that they realize, okay, we're an offense-driven team. Our defense is really good, but we have an offense averaging over 30 points per game. That's rare in the league right now. Probably at some point, December or January, maybe February, some team's going to hold them a touchdown less than that, maybe even 10 points less than that. How are we going to win that game? And if we add one more good player on defense, that'll help us win a game 21-20 when we're used to winning 34-17. So whether it's you enjoy being around Vaughn, and they will, that's one, or if it's two, the more nuanced thought of it football-wise, or how he's going to help them win the games that matter, maybe even a game where their offense isn't quite there. I think if you're in that locker room for a number of reasons, you're 100% on board with this.
Paul, I want to spend a couple of minutes talking about the job that the New Orleans Saints are doing and have done so far, particularly in beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Sunday. I thought very simply it's one of the best coaching jobs of Sean Payton's career. Not just because of the unlikely winning a game against Tom Brady and the Bucs with your third string quarterback, but it wasn't just that. I thought, and I talked to both Payton and Trevor Siemian after this game, and it wasn't just the fact that Siemian was in there playing. It was also a couple of other facts now as New Orleans looks at life in 2021 without Jameis Winston, the starting quarterback. But I thought it was a full roster effort. And that's what I really love about that. I remember Bill Parcells a long time ago when I covered the New York Giants. He used to say, I used to ask him questions about why do you churn your roster so much, like at the end of training camp, and why do you care so much about maybe this special teams guy or whatever? And he would always say that the 48th guy, the 50th guy on your roster at some point that year is either going to win or lose a game. And so you want to make sure that you have mentally and in a scouting sense have invested enough time so that you feel really good that if your 48th guy on the roster has to play a lot, then you feel really good about it. And that's where we come in with New Orleans in this game, in that it wasn't only Trevor Siemian, who, has not been a starting quarterback in the NFL since 2017, but it was Kevin White, who hadn't caught a pass since 2018. He might have had the most rotten luck of any player to be highly drafted in recent years when he was a high pick of the Bears, a top 10 pick. And he just could never get healthy. But that was a huge pass that Siemian threw early in the third quarter to him. A fullback who nobody's ever heard of, Alex Arma, getting his first target of the season. And how big was it? It was a touchdown, a 1-yard pass. Who expected that to happen? So many of those guys, Garrett Griffin, a tight end, arguably the fourth tight end on their depth chart coming into the season. He caught 2 important balls. And so all I'm saying is Sean Payton took lesser ingredients in this game and figured out a way to win one game, just win one game. And he figured out a way to win one game. And now, obviously, that's what he's going to have to do going forward. But I thought he just showed his coaching chops on Sunday in that game, Paul.
Yeah, coaching chops and scouting chops, too, for that whole organization. I think, first of all, Peter, made me think this must be a team that practices really, really well, really disciplined, really smart to put these kind of players in a handful of situations where they can see them on Wednesday and Thursday in these spots and think, okay, can we trust them? And that's the word that also comes to mind, trust. You hear coaches, you hear scouts, if you're around it a lot, talking about some of these back half of the roster players. And I'll ask this question, is he a high rep guy? Is he a rep guy in practice? And that means for us to trust him on Sunday, does he have to have a bunch of reps during the week? And if he's a guy who needs that, we can't trust him as the 42nd or 48th guy on this roster because he's not going to get those reps. He has to be around our starters in this really disciplined, tough practice and be able to pay attention and know he can get out there and do it himself, even though he might only do it a couple of times a week in practice. So wonderful job by Sean, but also I think you have to understand, you have to respect that they've got a team full of guys, the back half of the roster, that they've developed a way to trust, even though they are likely not getting the kind of reps in practice that they need.
Paul, you would really appreciate this being a former quarterback. But Trevor Siemian told me something that I talked to Siemian first and I talked to Peyton close to midnight. It was late. But when Trevor Siemian told me this and I told Peyton, Peyton's reaction was, oh my God, that is so great. Because just imagine in this game where Trevor Siemian has got to prepare like he's going to play in the game because he's the backup quarterback. Taysom Hill out with a concussion, should be back full go this week. But Taysom Hill not available, so Trevor Siemian is the backup. And Peyton's point was that so often we look at backup quarterbacks and they know, well, you better prepare like you're going to play. And imagine you do that for 1, 2, 3 years and you never play. Because that was the situation with Trevor Siemian. He just never played. But the fact that he was ready to go in and execute what they had said they were going to use in this offense, I thought was really, really good. And I asked Siemian about that, and I said, what really interested me, the most interesting play in this game was you come out of halftime, and your first play is you throw a deep ball on a go route to Kevin White, who has not caught a pass in the NFL since 2018. And that's your first throw out of the box. And Siemian told me, he said, listen, I was so happy with that call because understand, I'm playing scout team right now. That's my job. So I've got to get ready. But guess who else is playing scout team? Kevin White. So who do I have chemistry with right now? Because I throw to him every week. So whereas the starting quarterback on the team might not have a lot of chemistry with Kevin White, I do because I throw to him every day. And Peyton just loved that. It didn't enter his mind when he said, I'm going to make this call. What entered Peyton's mind was they were going to pick on Pierre Desir. And Peyton does this almost every week. He looks for what he considers, not that Pierre Desir's a bad player, even though he's been on a bunch of teams and can't find a home. But he just figured Pierre Desir is a guy who we're going to try to go after with speed players. And Kevin White has got a lot of speed. That just is a great example of you use a guy, everybody said, oh my God, Kevin White, he disappeared. We forgot he was even in the league, all that other stuff. But Peyton knows he's got one trait. Even if he doesn't have a lot of experience, he's got speed. We see a weak point on this corner. I don't care if he hasn't caught a ball in 20 years. He's going to catch one in this game. I loved in that game how Peyton trusted the depth of his roster.
Yeah, I enjoyed that part of your article yesterday morning, Peter, how you kind of drew out that example that really brought it full circle of these guys who didn't have a lot of experience playing, but they were playing together on scout team. It was just a really good snapshot of how they won. With Trevor Siemian, too, Peter, I think he's in a perfect spot. I mean, maybe perfect isn't the right word because it's difficult to be a backup, but he's in an advantageous spot for being a backup because if you go back and look at 2016 and 17, he started a lot of games. He just didn't start like 3 or 4. It's into double digits. When you can do that and then take that experience, I know he wasn't playing and he's been around a number of teams, the way you're able to learn and pick out things from other veteran quarterbacks you see, from other coaches that you listen to, it just sinks in a little more. And he's had 3 or 4 seasons to use that experience to accelerate the learning curve. And I'm sure that helped him, the combination of playing and being out for a while to gather perspective and gain even more knowledge helped him. And number 2, the Saints have a real identity now. I mean, they haven't accidentally found their way to 5-2 without Drew Brees playing the way Drew played for all those years. They're top 5 in the league in turnover margin, in scoring defense, and in rushing yards. That's how they win. They still need Taysom Hill or Trevor Siemian to convert 3rd and 7s, to not turn it over to play well.
Right.
But this is a team that's driven on other things outside of spectacular quarterback play. So I really like the story, and I really like the situation Trevor's in. And I love the potential for New Orleans to win, even if it is with a quarterback that nobody thought was going to be playing.
You know, the last thing I would say on the Saints, in recent weeks, they've had 3 phone calls, 3 different teams call and try to acquire Trevor Siemian. I would bet $1,000 that one of them is the New York Jets. He didn't tell me which teams, but he's had teams call to try to acquire Trevor Siemian. And look, the Saints could use a draft choice or two. You know, they are a little threadbare in the draft now, but they wouldn't do it because Peyton's view is that I really like Trevor Siemian. He's calm, he's cool. In the off chance we may need him, and who knows, maybe deep down Peyton knew more than he was saying, but in the off chance that they were going to need him, he did not want to give him away for the 178th pick in the draft in 2023, or whatever it would have been. But I give him credit, he and Mickey Loomis, the GM, for knowing when to hold him and when not to fold him. Paul, I want to get to 3 other topics quickly. One is just Robert Saleh, the New York Jets coach, after that amazing and exhilarating victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. He refuses to close the door on Mike White, who threw for over 400 yards in that game. He refused to close the door on Mike White being his quarterback going forward. And he basically said, hey, look, anything is possible. I wonder what you thought of that. I'm not sure I'm against it, but it did seem a little bit odd that he basically has opened the door to a possible quarterback controversy between Mike White and the 2nd pick in this year's draft, Zach Wilson.
It's hard to unsee what he did and to win that kind of game. It's not like a backup came in and helped you win 10-9 or 17-16. I mean, he was in a shootout with Joe Burrow, and he threw for over 400 yards. Team rallied around him. He made a lot of difficult throws. Now, granted, it's only one game, but anybody who plays that way for a team who's struggling at the position prior to that, the coach has to be wide-eyed and say, okay, let's see if he can do that again. And if he does do it again, I would certainly entertain the option of going with that guy. And I kind of come back to what I just said about Trevor Siemian. It's a smaller example, but Trevor played a lot, went to the bench for a long time, and I think his experience comes out better now. Zach Wilson may be better off taking that handful of games, licking his wounds, and being on the bench and watching for a little while. So it could be best for the short term of the Jets if Kevin's going to play this way. And it just might be best for Zach as well if he can watch and learn and sit back for a little while before he goes back in.
The Jets do not want to create a monster in giving Mike White a lot of games and having him play great and all that. I totally get it. But the more I've watched Zach Wilson, the more I think this is one guy who could use some time, on the sidelines. It's one guy who could use some time to just soak it in. Paul, I watched a bunch of the Patriots against the Chargers. I thought it was a really, really fun game. And I'll tell you what interests me about the Patriots. They have some defensive playmakers that nobody really either respects or talks about very much. One of those guys surfaced on Sunday, safety Adrian Phillips, the former Charger. And they have a lot of guys who can make plays on defense. They don't need the explosive offense. They can win games narrowly, but the Patriots very, very much in a not really deep AFC this year. The Patriots have a look of maybe the 5 or 6 seed in the playoffs this year.
A lot of kind of middle of the road play right now in the AFC, Peter. There are 6 teams, almost half the AFC, with 4 wins, and the Patriots are one of them. And with the way Mac Jones is developing, with the ton of talent you mentioned on defense, and with Belichick's history, I mean, there's no reason to doubt the Patriots in that group of 6. You know, a couple of them are going to surface and be around in January, and I would not bet against the Pats. And isn't it just so Belichick-like in this, as they're kind of figuring things out without Tom Brady, to be this team that lost 3 of the first 4 games, and you say, oh, offense struggled last year, Mac Jones are going to struggle. You know, we'll check back in later. Well, now all of a sudden they've won 3 of the last 4. The defense is standing out. Jones is playing just fine, getting better all the time. So that's a team, not just because of the history with Bill, but because of what they're doing right now, definitely worth keeping an eye on.
Paul, what should the Detroit Lions do about Jared Goff?
I think they have to ask themselves this question. Is he potentially part of the solution on offense? And they scored more than 20, I think, the first game, Peter. They haven't scored more than 20 points in their 7 losses since. That's nearly impossible to do in the NFL. And they're one of these teams hovering below 20 per game. Is he somebody that can be part of getting past that? Or is he the main reason, or one of the biggest reasons, that they are struggling so mightily on offense? I mean, I don't know what you can do in the right now, unless there's something they're talking about with Deshaun Watson. But in terms of the long term, is he someone who can lead you out of this? Or have you seen enough to say, you know what, this isn't going to get any better with that guy behind center, and they would have to make a tough call there?
I think it's going to be one of those things that, as unfortunate as this sounds, I really think they're going to have to cut the cord with him in the offseason, because they're going to see enough. They've probably almost seen enough now to realize he's not what they thought he was. And I would agree with you. This could be an incredibly tough decision for them to make. But I would give him time to work his way out of it. I have extreme doubts that he will. And I want to end, Paul, one last thing. Just sort of an appreciation for Mike Tomlin. We all saw him last week when he decried even being brought up in a rumor sense with college jobs. He said, I got one of the best jobs in professional sports. And I find it so interesting that in his 15 years at the helm of the Pittsburgh Steelers, he now has won as many games in the regular season as Bill Cowher, and his winning percentage is 65%. Cowher's was 62%. And I just think sometimes, especially with the pressure on coaches to win, and to win so big, that even though the Steelers have not won the Super Bowl in recent years, I have a great appreciation for Mike Tomlin getting team after team, time after time, ready to go and play at a high level.
Peter, you've been around this a long time. I've been around it a little bit. And there are always coaches who present themselves well. They look to the sideline, they say the right things after the game, and you think, gosh, I really like this guy. But then you talk to somebody off the record who played for him, and they say, no, you would not like him if you played for him. I can't find a former player who's been in that locker room that doesn't speak well of Mike Tomlin. Like, they all like him. They all wanted to play for him. They want to keep playing for him. It just so happens within the last couple of weeks, Peter, my radio analyst at Notre Dame, Ryan Harris, played for the Steelers for a little while. He played for 4, 5, 6 teams. And I asked him, we were driving somewhere, I'm like, who's the one coach? Because you played for some pretty big name guys that you would really like to still play for. And without a doubt, big smile, Mike Tomlin, walking into the Mike Tomlin stories and what made him so special. So I agree with what you said. I like what I see from him. And I love talking to former players who've been around him, who from their own experience speak even higher of him than you or I could.
That's great. Paul Burmeister, thanks so much for taking the time this week. A lot of insight and a lot of things going on in the NFL right now. We tried to hit a few of them, but I appreciate it, and we'll be back next week for more.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.